Good evening. We're back with more Disney Lorcana, and this evening will be a card review for the Sapphire cards from the Into the Inklands set, the most recent set. Let's dive in, starting with the commons first, as always. Cloud Kicker, 1 cost, 0-1 with Ward. Opponents can't choose this character except to challenge. This card is bad. The 0-1 is not good stats for a 1 cost card, and the only upside here is the ward, and that is certainly not worth having 0 attack. Challenging a 1 cost character, very easy to do. I really can't see a use for this card. I guess maybe as a target for a buff, that'd be about it. But no, I don't think this is good at all. Distract, 2 cost, chosen character gets -2 attack this turn, draw a card. So it cycles itself. It enables you to trade in a beneficial way. It's a good budget card. It'll get into some budget decks, I expect. If you don't have, let's say you were building a deck that was designed to have some removal cards in it, and you found, oh, I don't have those cards in my collection, you could swap in Distract and do just fine. That will be its role in the game. Don't think we'll see it in too many competitive decks, but we could see it in some budget decks. Repair, 2 cost, remove up to 3 damage from one of your locations or characters. As with the healing cards in the Amber Sphere, this isn't going to see play. It's got to be really high value, like Rapunzel, for a healing card to see play. There isn't enough demand in the game for these cards. Captain Amelia, 3 cost, 1/5. During your turn, this character gains evasive. It's not very useful to gain evasive only during your turn unless you can trade up, or at least trade evenly. Again, this card seems built to draw buffs, like a support target, and when it's targeted by a support card, it'll be decent. Same with Kit Cloud Kicker, but the problem is if you're going to make cards underpowered but designed to be targeted by buffs, then the buffing card has to be really, really good to make up for the underpowered nature of the card it's targeting, and that just doesn't really happen in the game. The buffing cards are themselves only good to slightly above average, and so you can't really have targets for your buffing cards that are this weak and just say, well, I'll just buff them later. Yeah, you could buff a good card. That'd be even better, right? So, yeah, I don't see this card getting played much. Pluto, 3 cost, 3/4, 1 lore, as I've said quite a number of times with cards like this that have no ability. The stats aren't good enough to justify running it, except in a budget deck. It'll find a spot in budget decks when the collection is not as complete as the player will like, or in a sealed deck environment. Vault Door, 4 cost. Item, your locations and characters at locations gain resist +1. That's actually interesting. It's expensive. You'd have to prevent a lot of damage. If this was going to be a really, really long game, this would be a good card. I think games on average are not long enough to make this good. It is formidable if you got a couple of them on the table, but it's slow at 4 cost. So I think it's good, and in a heavy control environment, I do think this would be a good card. I don't know if we'll ever see that environment in the game. If we do ever see a heavy control environment, I think this card would be good. It'd be good in the long term. It's just be really long term. You'd need to gain the benefit of this probably, I don't know, 6 or 7 times to make it good. Probably like 6 times would be good. And that just isn't going to happen without a very long game. Louis, Chill Nephew, 4 cost, 3/4 support. Whenever this character quests, you may add their attack to another character's attack this turn. 2 lore. Well, let's say you play him for 4 cost, then you quest once, and then he dies. So you get 2 lore, you get 3 attack added to somebody else. So that would be like a 6/4 with 2 lore. It's not bad. This is a pretty good card for a basic. I haven't seen anybody really try to play a support-oriented deck. It would probably work best as like Amethyst Sapphire with bounce cards. But I think there are better targets for your bounce cards. The card draw Merlin, the lore Merlin. It's possible that there will be a deck that will run this card though. It's like a bounce support type deck. The issue is conquering the board only goes so far. And so that's why the bounce have oriented themselves around either instant removal. The bounce decks orient themselves around instant removal, card draw, or lore, because those provide a more immediate path to victory. Support, fighting for the board, is kind of a side goal. And so this card does fight for the board really well. However, fighting for the board doesn't translate directly into wins the way it does in other games like Hearthstone. Like this card in Hearthstone would be really, really good. But in Lorcana, it's more about lore generation, and also the card's not very good if you don't have a target for his ability, and you won't always, as players mostly try to clear the board every round. So I like the card a little bit. I'll keep it in mind as something that may be experimented with. As a budget card, it's very good. Like in budget decks, in a sealed deck environment, this is going to be a very good card. In a highly competitive constructed environment, probably not. Grammatala, 4 cost, 3/3. When you play this character, look at the top 2 cards of your deck. You may put 1 into your hand, put the rest on the bottom of the deck in any order. I don't think that scrying or that card draw effect is good enough to justify the low stats of the card. So I don't think this will see play. It's I would consider it roughly equivalent to like a 5/4. If I was handicapping it with 1 lore at 4 cost, that isn't really a good card. The scrying effect I don't assign much value to, so I do not see this getting played. McDuck Manor, 4 cost, 1 movement cost, no ability, 9 health, and 2 lore. That is a solid card. That card definitely will get played. I've already seen it in some highly competitive decks. 9 health is not easy to remove, and 2 lore every turn until you do remove it. You're practically guaranteed to get 4 lore out of this card, at least unless they have a Rise of the Titans. It's a very good card. It'll see play. I don't know if it'll see play in every single Sapphire deck, but it'll see play in a lot of them. A lot of Sapphire decks. This is really good. I like it a lot. Rufus Orphanage Cat, 5 cost, 4/5. When this character is banished, you may put this card into your inkwell, face down, and exerted. Huh. That's a pretty good card. It's slow in that if you play it on turn 5, you're not going to see the full benefit of it for a couple of turns at least. So it has to be like a 7-turn game that you're playing. And the issue is rush decks exist, and they're trying to end the game quickly by turn 6 ideally. And so this card, again, as with Vault Door, really only makes sense in a heavy control environment. And in every card game I've ever played, more casual players gravitate toward rush decks. So there probably never will be a heavy control environment where this makes sense. But if you could guarantee that every time you play the deck you'd be running like 7, 8, 9 turns, this would be a good card. As it is, no. And also, it'll take a turn or two for you actually to get him banished and into your inkwell, because at only one lore, the opposing player doesn't really have a reason to target it. They could just ignore it, so you have to attack into them. You might not find a good opportunity to get him into your inkwell for 2 turns. Then you're talking about like 9 or 10 turns before you really get full value out of this. So it's good, but it's slow. It's too slow. Maid Marian, High Delightful Dreamer. 5 cost, 4/4. When you play this character, chosen character gets -2 attack this turn. 2 lore. I don't think that's a good enough ability to justify the low stats. It would need to be something like 5/5, I think, to get play. And even then, it might get bumped out for more high value cards. Once you get up into the 5-6 cost range, the cards that are available are really, really high value. And so this card goes into the binder. I don't think we'll see it in competitive play. King Louis, Bandleader, 7 cost, 7/7, 3 lore. A perfectly acceptable substitute when you don't have like a Cinderella or something like that. There really is no scenario, if you're playing Sapphire Steel that is, if you're missing a high cost card, looking at a deck list, you're like, I want to build that deck, but I don't have X card. King Louis will be a card that you'll swap in as a budget option. He'll be a terror in sealed decks, but otherwise we will not see him, because when you're in a competitive environment, opponents are going to have access to some very efficient removal cards, and King Louis doesn't do anything immediately. So when you pay 7 for him and then he just gets bounced back to hand by an Emerald card or removed by Hades or whatever, then you're really sad because you got nothing for your 7 cost. So that's why you won't see play in a competitive environment, but in a sealed deck where they may not have those cards because they typically are rare, super rare, or legendary, then he will be really good. On to the uncommons. Highlight of the commons was McDuck Manor. That card is really good and we'll see play for sure. Scrooge's Top Hat, 2 cost, not inkable. Exert, you pay 1 less for the next item you play this turn. In a very item heavy deck, this will be a good card. I'd say you'd need to play like 3 items with this for it to be good. So you need to be planning on playing a lot of items and you need to draw this early. And if you do that, then this is pretty good. But I don't know that the deck exists in the competitive environment that plays that many items right now. You might see it occasionally. Probably not very often though. Genie, Cramped in the Lamp, 2 cost, 2/2, 2 lore. Might see play just because of that 2 lore. You will usually get 2 lore out of him, and any card where you can get the same amount of lore that you put in, exempting 1-drops, is going to see some play in some deck sometime. Because if you could get 1 lore for every energy you spend, you would end the game on turn 6. And that would obviously be very good. So I think you'll see some Genie. Yeah, I think you'll see some Genie. You could see it in Sapphire Emerald. Well, no, probably not. Probably not, I would say. The Genie I was thinking of actually isn't a shift target. There are some high-cost Genies that have a shift value. You don't see them much. But I do like this card a little bit, and I think it will see play, just because of that 2 lore. And 2 cost for 2 lore is pretty good, especially in rush type decks. Now Sapphire doesn't really lend itself to rush type decks, it's a more control oriented color. But anyway, I think you might see this from time to time, if not now, in the future. Montanui, Island Paradise, 2 cost, 1 movement cost, 5 health, 1 lore. Whenever a character is banished while here, you may put that card into your inkwell face down, and exerted. Well, that's really good. Move a character there for 1, and then if they're banished, get them into your inkwell. The problem is the low health means the opponent will probably just deal with the location, and you won't be able to punish them too much for doing so. So if it had 1 more health, it would probably be pretty good, because it would give it greater survivability against some 5 attack characters. 6 attack is much less common. But at 5 health, I don't think this sees too much play. It's just too weak in the late game. And 5 health just doesn't offer enough survivability. Scrooge McDuck Uncle Moneybags. 2 cost 1/3. Whenever this character quests, you pay 1 less for the next item you play this turn. Well, you only really need to quest. You need to quest like twice to make this good. At once, if you quest once, play an item, it's a 1/3, which is not bad. 1/3s get played all the time in competitive decks. If you can quest twice, it's really good. You probably won't be able to. And again, as with many Sapphire cards, it's a little slow. It takes many turns to get the full value out of it. I think that's why we don't see Sapphire that much. There's one Sapphire deck that goes around, but that's about it. And the reason is because the cards are just too slow, and the competitive environment is almost always pretty fast. Dewey, Showy, Nephew, 3 cost, 2/3 with support. Whenever this character quests, you may add their attack to another chosen character's attack this turn, and 2 lore. It's okay. It's good if you can quest twice. You probably won't be able to. As with the other support card, they are pretty good, and they do tell us why there's targets for their buffs in the set that are not very good. I don't think you would ever play the targets. You might play these cards in a budget type deck. I don't think they're good enough to be competitive because, I mean, this card is better than the other one. It's 3 cost and 2 lore. If you quest twice, it's good. If you're able to use its attack both times, I mean, just being able to quest twice alone with 2 lore is good. It's not survivable. It's vulnerable to removal because you don't get anything for it right away unless you need the trade up. It's just not that common to need extra attack to trade up. The current meta isn't really board control oriented enough to make this a really good card, but if that meta does exist, this will be really good. This will be very good in Hearthstone, which is more of an absolute board control type of game. So I like the card, just perhaps not in the current meta. But we'll see how the game evolves. Flintheart Glomgold Lone Cheater. 4 cost 3/4. During your turn, this character gains evasive. Gaining evasive during your turn isn't really good enough to justify weaker stats. 2 lore is nice though. It's not a bad card. It'll see play in budget decks. These uncommon and commons from Sapphire, they've got some above average cards. Nothing exceptional. I've only seen 1 playable card so far, McDuck Manor, but they're above average. They'll be good in sealed deck. There'll be some decent budget decks to emerge from Sapphire, I would say. The Queen, Mirror Seeker, 4 cost 2/5. Whenever this character quests, you may look at the top 3 cards of your deck and put them back in any order. It's pretty weak stats and pretty weak lore, and I don't value the scrying effect highly enough to make up for that, so I don't think this will see play. Unless cards come into the game that really can profit off of knowing what's on top of your deck. But otherwise, we won't see this card really at all. Its stats are really weak. How Far I'll Go. 4 cost song. Look at the top 2 cards of your deck, put 1 into your hand, and the other into your inkwell, face down, and exerted. Interesting. It's good. Not inkable hurts, but I think it'll see play. Now, the Sapphire deck that's currently good is not a straight ramp deck. It doesn't really try to take advantage of ramp cards like Bell. It uses some ramp and then card draw. This card is a little cumbersome with the uninkable, but overall pretty good, and I do think it'll see play. Now, straight ramp decks, they're not really in the meta right now, the competitive meta, because of how fast the meta is, and I don't expect that to ever change. Based on my history with card games, if you give players the option of playing rush decks, they always will. And usually, card game developers do give players the option of playing rush decks because casual players gravitate towards rush decks, and if you don't give them the option of playing that type of deck, then they won't play your game. So I don't think there will be a meta where this is featured in a really top deck. But I do like the card, and I would like to see that meta. And I think we'll see this card in some maybe B or even A tier decks. Just not S tier. Kit Cloud Kicker Navigator. 6 cost, 2/5, shift 3. Has ward and 3 lore. Interesting. So if you get him into play on turn 3, and then this, it kind of seems like they were thinking there might be some synergy with Emerald when they were making this, because they're including the support characters that would be good with bounce. There's a good Kit Cloud Kicker who's 3 cost in Emerald. You could then shift this Cloud Kicker in. And at 3 cost, he's pretty good. If you gotta play him for 6, he's really weak compared to other 6 drops. But at 3, he's pretty good. If you get him early, he's tough to deal with. 3 lore, 5 health, you have to challenge him. If you get him in late, he's pretty bad. So he's a early game compensation for other cards in the set that are slow, or other cards in the color that are very slow. I don't really think he sees play, though. He just doesn't really fit in any deck. I don't know, maybe there's a Sapphire Emerald deck out there that'll be good, and he might fit in that deck. It would be a faster deck with bounce cards trying to control the board, with the ducks, adding support to stuff. It'd be an interesting deck. I might see if I can generate a list for that deck and try it out. We'll see. Bell's House, 1 cost, 2 movement cost, 6 health. If you have a character here, you pay 1 less to play items. So you have to pay 3 to get this out and get a character there. So you'd probably, and it doesn't generate any lore, so you'd probably need to play like 4 items to make this good before it gets taken down, before the 6 health gets taken down. That isn't going to happen. So this is not a good card. It's too slow, and it's too hard to defend locations from getting eliminated. So we're not going to see this card, I don't think. Aurelian Gyro Sensor, 2 cost item. Whenever one of your character's quests, you may look at the top card of your deck, put it on either the top or the bottom of your deck. So it's permanent scry ability. It's just I don't really value scrying in this game, so I don't see ever playing this deck, or this card, I mean. There's another color that has scrying synergy, but not enough. It's not powerful enough, so it'll probably just be a fun thematic type deck where this card would fit. Huey Savvy Nephew, 2 cost, 2/2 support. Whenever this character quests, if you have characters named Dewey and Louie in play, you may draw 3 cards. That's a big payoff for what is a relatively difficult combo to set up. But if you can set that up, I mean, that's a really strong effect. and would make all three of them very good value to play together. That'd be an interesting deck. Huey, Dewey, and Louie deck with their support abilities and then Huey's ability. Might try the deck at least. Might try it. Like Sapphire Emerald, probably. Be interesting. It would fight for the board really well. I'm just not sure if it would generate enough lore. Or removal for targets that are not exhausted. Gyro Gear Loose. 3 cost, 1/4. Exert to put an item from your discard on the top of your deck. Don't know that you'll see a lot of items in your discard. So yeah, I don't think this is very good. It's a card draw kind of, but an inefficient way, very inefficient. Yeah, I don't think this is good at all. I don't think we'll really ever see this card. Yeah, I just can't imagine a scenario where that would be really good or really strong, or can't imagine a deck where that would be really strong. Mama Odi, Mystical Maven, 3/1. Whenever you play a song, you may put the top card of your deck into your inkwell, face down, and exerted. Okay, how many times would you need to do that for this to be good? I mean, probably only once. If you get this out early in the game, you play Mama Odi, then the next turn you have her sing a 3-cost song. And then that'd be pretty good. I really only need to do that once if you get it off early in the game. It still seems kind of slow though, just because it doesn't provide pressure right away. Any cards where you have to take 2 turns to set them up, they need a really strong payoff against aggro, or you're going to be in trouble against aggro. That is the problem with Sapphire. Good, but slow. Heart of Tefiti, 3 cost, exert, and pay 2 energy to put the top card of your deck into your inkwell face down and exerted. That's expensive for that. Because it does generate value, but because it's expensive, to generate enough value to make this really good would be slow. It would be quite slow, which is the same problem we've been encountering all throughout these card reviews with cards in this set. Sapphire is just slow, so it's going to do well against other control-oriented or slow-type decks, and it's going to do poorly against aggro. It doesn't have good tools against aggro, so whatever other color you pair it with would have to have good, really good aggro tools. Really good tools for dealing with aggro to make cards like this good. I see them played in the game sometimes. I have yet to see a deck that I thought was really strong or going to go really far. There is a Sapphire deck that is good, but it doesn't use cards like this. Audrey Ramirez, the Engineer, 5 cost 2/5 with Ward. Whenever this character quests ready one of your items. Okay, so you need to get enough value out of the items you're readying to make up for the low stats. And you'd need this character not to get challenged and destroyed. Probably not going to happen. So probably not going to see this card. It could be good if you could, but the situation where you could actually protect it and take full advantage of it, you're probably winning the game anyway, because you'd have such a strong board state, so you wouldn't really even need this card. It'd be a win more card, best case. Friend Like Me, 5 cost, song. Each player puts the top 3 cards of their deck into their inkwell face down and exerted. The only reason this is good is if you assume that your deck is able to take advantage of more ink, more so than the opponent's deck is. I've seen this card played against me, and I was actually able to take advantage of it better than my opponent. Your opponent gets a chance to do so first. If you play this outright, if you sing it, maybe you can. take advantage of it first, but yeah, I don't think it provides enough value for you, the player playing it, to actually justify playing the card. So I don't think we'll see this too much. Pretty weak cards in the Sapphire color this set. Very weak. We're through the rares now, and I've really only seen one playable card, which is a common McDuck Manor. Wendy Darling, 3 cost, 3/1, ward, support, 2 lore. You'd probably play it in the Huey, Dewey, and Louie deck, but again, I don't think that deck is good enough, because I don't think fighting for board control through challenging is good enough. It's not Hearthstone. You can't just fight any character you want to, basically. The game is more oriented around lore, and so the support ability just isn't good enough to justify the lower stats. And 1 health is really easy to deal with. Scrooge McDuck, richest duck in the world. 5 cost, 3/5. During your turn, the character gains evasive. During your turn, whenever this character banishes another character in a challenge, you may play an item for free. If you could play 2 items that way, this would be really good. It is very unlikely you'll be able to do that most of the time. You probably will be able to banish 1 character and then he dies. And that would make him like it. Well, I take that back. It depends on the item. I was thinking of the popularly played items like Popsicle. You'd need like 2 Popsicles to be good, but if you could play a 2 cost item with this for free, then we're talking. So maybe a Fishborn Quill, but it's also an uninkable card, and that's a relatively niche combo. I think that the deck where this card would be really good probably doesn't exist, or is maybe mediocre. It exists, but it would be mediocre and not competitive. We need to see more really high value and relatively fast items in the game that you'd want to play with this character for it to be good. That could happen in the future. We'll see. Cost reduction is always worth watching in any card game, and this is cost reduction, so there may be a situation in the future where Scrooge McDuck makes sense. Cost reduction is always worth watching. Tinkerbell, very clever fairy, 5 cost, 3/4. Whenever one of your items is banished, you may put that card into your inkwell, face down and exerted. Well, there is a deck out there that wants to banish some items, utilizing Hiram. But I think that deck plays Tinkerbell Giant Fairy as a 5 cost. This is too slow. It's another card that makes sense in like 8 or 9 turn games, but you just won't be able to play that type of game very often because aggro exists. So, yeah. Probably not on Tinkerbell, very clever fairy, unless we see a heavy control-oriented meta where we're going like 10 turns most of the time. On to the legendaries. Lucky Dime, 7 cost. Exert. Pay 2 energy. Choose a character of yours and gain lore equal to their lore. For 2 cost every time, so you probably are paying 7 so that you can generate 2 lore for 2 cost anytime you want to. Any turn you want to. That would take a lot. This would never be an efficient card where you're getting as much lore as you paid for it. You'd need a lot of extra energy to play this card. A lot of extra energy. And that is kind of what Sapphire wants to do. It's just it's too slow. I've been saying that over and over. It's just too slow, unfortunately, to be a very competitive card in the current meta. But should we ever see a control-oriented meta, Sapphire we'll see a lot more of. Gramatala, Spirit of the Ocean, 7 cost, 4/8, shift 5. Whenever a card is put into your inkwell, gain 1 lore. And she quests for 2 as well. It's a good card. However, it's slow. Probably too slow for the competitive meta, but should we ever see a control-oriented meta, Gramatala would be really, really good. And I do think we'll see her sometimes. She offers potential. I mean, how much lore would you need to get to make this good? How many cards would have to go into your inkwell? At least 2, I would think. At least 2. While this card is in play. So we're talking about a turn 7 play and then 2 cards going into your inkwell after that. This character survives and doesn't get removed by any of the popular cards in the meta. Just isn't going to happen often enough in a competitive meta to make this good. That's it for the Sapphire cards, and I gotta say, Sapphire, weakest of the set, I think, weakest of the Into the Inklands set of all the colors. Got almost no help except for McDuck Manor, the location, a common. The rest of the Sapphire cards, I don't think we'll see them much in the current fast meta. So, pretty disappointing from Sapphire. That's all for now, and thank you for watching.